Hi, I'm Zen and welcome to this video on how to create a navigation bar on a proper website. We're applying this to the Into the Wild site as part of the Easy Build series. So let's get into it. Alright, the aim of this video is to make the header and footer for the Into the Wild website based on design that we made in Figma. Now, whoa, wait a minute before you log off, because they are in fact simple nav bars, so my type's not misleading. So no, just bear with me. Look, don't leave me. You can see them on the screen here. Here is my top navigation and my bottom navigation. Okay, and it's based on design we did in Figma that looks like this. Now, this particular video is based on the HTML and basic CSS construction. If you are looking for the videos on how to use the hover, roll and roll out effects type of thing, then this video is not for you. However, relax. There are some planned for this channel, and if this card is showing up right about now, then guess what? I've already made them. If not, well, really thanks a lot for being my early viewer. Okay, don't forget to like and subscribe to help this channel grow. And do check back because they are coming soon. I promise, they're coming. Now, if you've also missed the videos on how to do this in Figma, don't worry. Click on yet another card, which should be appearing up just now at the top of the screen, so you can watch those videos. And of course, like all my other links, they'll be in the description as well. Also, if you are completely new to this channel, which considering the number of subscribers I have at the time of making this video is, well, let's be honest, extremely likely. But you like to get your setup the same as mine, please watch the Getting Started playlist, which should also be appearing as a card now. That will show you how to install Visual Studio Code and Laragon, that is, if you don't want to use my pen drive system, which is also on that playlist, as well as how to make these starter pages. Please remember that most of these videos in the playlist were when I first started making videos, so the quality isn't as good as it could be, but then the same could be said about this one. I'm still learning, man. Help me out. Also, there is a link in the description for the starter files for this video, which is basically just the base PHP files and the Google fonts. Okay, so a reminder of what we're aiming for. It is this. The base page for the Into the Wild site that we made in Figma, which we can see here. We've hidden the background, so you can see we've actually got a semi-transparent background, but if we bring it back in, you can see it just sort of melds in quite nicely. And here is how it should look like in reality. As you can see, there are some minor differences from how it was in the mock-up, understandable and normal to happen. I've also zoomed in just so that we can actually see it in all its so-called glory. Now, the only thing that we won't be doing in this video that you can see here is the centering of the navigation bar. That is actually the next video, which is a nice short one, but there's a lot of people who just want to know how to center the website, so that's its own video. Well, I suppose it's time to start coding. So this is called Easy Build series, in case you don't know, because we're going to build this in what could be described as the traditional way. And no, I don't mean using tables if you're really old school, but by using a mixture of absolute and relative positioning and maybe some floats. The truth is, it isn't much easier than a grid layout, but we aren't really going to be concerned with making the website responsive. There will be some responsive elements in there, but not much. If you want to use a grid layout, there is another series coming out, which I think is on HBO in America and Sky One in the UK. Oh, hang on a minute. Nope. Apparently the production quality is really bad, so it'll just be in my channel instead. Oh well, sorry. Coming soon, and I do mean soon, like a couple of weeks' time. The first thing we need to do though is to create the HTML, which is essentially the same regardless of the build method. So the HTML here is going to be basically the same if we're doing a grid method or if we're using the Easy Build absolute relative positioning. The main navigation is in the header PHP, and we're going to be using Emmet here to speed things up. Because it's navigation bar, we're going to use the keyword nav, okay, or the element name nav. We're also going to give it a class of nav, and then its modifier of nav _main, and remember this is because we are using the then method. Then we're going to give it children, and that is the anchor tag with a class of nav _link, because this is the element from the block nav, which is why we have the nav in there to represent the parent. And then we want 7 of those, and we just do times 7, and then we press enter, and it comes out a bit messy, but don't worry, we're going to clean it up. Okay, so as I said before, this was done in Emmet. That's the sort of code we were typing in. If you don't understand Emmet, don't worry. There should be another card, I think probably the last card I can put in, coming up about now for you. Feel free to watch it and tell me how awesome I am. It'd be nice if anyone told me I was awesome, to be fair. While we're doing this, it's also important to note that the actual cleaning up of this text doesn't do anything to the code itself, okay? So neither Visual Studio Code nor your browser actually cares about what we call white space, which includes the indentation. It is done to make it easy for us. As humans, we like space so we can actually see things better. And in this particular case, what it does, it allows us to see where one link starts and finishes, as well as that all the links are children to this nav class. Now, also we can see that I'm out a bit, so I'm just going to highlight it all, Shift and Tab to bring it back one. And there we have it all nicely formatted. All we've got to do now is to add the actual links to the links, the addresses and the text that people are going to click on. So let's do that. You may or may not know, but the home page on every website is normally called index, index HTML, index PHP. And that is just, again, a system to allow the web server to know what page to give them. Now, this last one here is actually going to be the logo. So we're going to give it, again, a modifier class so that we can format it slightly different from the rest of the other links. Fantastic. Now we've done that, we can actually go and see what our page looks like already. So what we're going to do is to save it. And because it is a PHP page and it's a header page, we actually are going to have to use Laragon to view it, or any of your web server software that you want to use. And don't forget, we've got to open up the base.php because that's what includes the header, and that will allow the footer to be seen once we put something in our footer. So let's have a look at it. As we can see, this is definitely not the sexiest thing on the internet. We'll deal with all the reasons why it looks the way it does as we fix them. So there are many different ways that we can start on it. One of the things I'm going to do here is to start on the actual font itself, okay, change the font and the colors. And while we're doing that, we might as well also set up all of our, or at least the majority of our CSS variables while we're at it. Again, there is a video on CSS variables, but I think I've hit my card limit now. As we can see, we've already got the base CSS file already attached. That was part of the pre-made pages that we've already got. So we're just going to go into base CSS and we can see it's empty. So first job we got to do is to start to declare the font. And we've already got some fonts again in the start files. And the one we're going to be using for our titles and our navigation is the Syncopate. Again, there are videos on how to do fonts. So we're not going to cover that here. We're just going to put the code in. Feel free to pause the video in case you need to copy the code. So now we've got our font face set up, what we need to do is to create the CSS variables that we're going to be using, as well as to do the standard font size reset. To reset the font size, we put in font size and we use the percentage of 62.5%. And if you're unsure about why we do that, the reason is quite simple. The default size of a font in a web page is 16 pixels. And we're going to be using mainly rems into changing our font sizes. And rems are based on the base font size. And 16 is not a nice number to start with. So 62.5% of 16 is actually 10. So we're resetting the base font size to 10, so it makes our multiplications easy. So the first thing we're going to do is to create the primary color of our website, which is the green color. Now, to get this color, all we need to do is again to go into Figma, and we can click onto the book itself, the page, and we can see the colors are over here. Okay, and we can also see we've got a transparent version of it as well. So we've got white being one of the colors, we've got transparent green and the normal green. We're also going to add the color black because we're going to be using that later on in the website. And while we're here, we might as well also add the fonts that we're going to be using as well. So back to here, we're going to set the primary color. So that is going to be #5B8338. And then we're going to do the primary trans. So we're using a double hyphen because it is a modifier of the original. Next, we're going to use white as our secondary color. And of course, don't forget the trans version of it. And then the tertiary color, the third color, which will be black. And of course, can't spell tertiary. And of course, the it at 50%. Finally, we need to add our font definition. So I like to keep all my themes sort of together. So I'm going to put the font information at the top along with the root. So that's our title font. And we might as well put in the primary font for the rest of the site, which will be Roboto. Now, we haven't actually done the rules for Roboto yet, but we will do a bit later on. So these are all of the variables that we think we're going to need for the moment. Out of interest, did you know about the transparency trick with the hex colors? Okay, if you just add 2 more numbers at the end, you can give the transparency level between 0 and FF. In fact, that's even better than if you're using the RGBA, because that only allows the RGBA between 0 and 100. It's a nice little trick. If there's a CSS trick that you prefer that you know, please share it in the links below. And if it's really cool, I shall give you a shout out on it and I'll do a video on it. So the next thing we actually want to do is start to apply these rules so that our navigation bar actually changes. So the first thing we should do is create the rule for the nav bar itself. We'll put in the rule for nav and we're going to put in background color and we're going to use the primary color. So we're going to do var, in fact, it's the primary color trans. So we save that. Let's have a look at what it looks like on our web page. So here we are on the web page. We're just going to refresh this. Now, as you can see here, it hasn't worked properly. So we need to do Control and F5 to force the refresh. And suddenly it makes the changes. Our text size is shrunk a bit because we've reset the text size to 62.5%, like we said, to 10 pixels. So we can go off and fix that now. And at the same time, let's give it the correct font, the color, and let's get rid of that underlined text while we are at it. So to do that, we actually need to focus on the links themselves. So that's a class we're going to use, nav_link. So here are the rules for the nav link. I don't think there's anything there which really needs explaining. If you're not sure about what rems are, it is a relative M font size. Again, there is a video on the channel about it, so please do watch that. But let's see what these changes have done. And we can see there's been a huge change to the text. It's getting very close, not very close, but it's getting a lot closer to the actual end result, which, as we said, should look like this. So we notice that all the text is being bunched up. It bunches up because the anchor tag by default is what is known as an inline element. This means that it tries to take up as little space as possible and shares its line, that is the horizontal space of that section, with everything else. Paddings and margins are also basically ignored. The reason why the links are on different lines is because we put break line rules in the login and the logo link. So if we just have a quick look at that, we can see we put a BR here in the About Us and in login and then into the wild. So when we go back and look at it, there you go, About Us, login, broken, into the broken wild. So that's why it's all on these different lines. What we need to do is to change them into inline blocks so that they can retain a sort of proper space and dimensions. Then that gives the ability to apply margins that will spread them out. So let's do that. Obviously, I already know the values that I'm using here because I've done it beforehand, but trust me, this is just done with a bit of experimentation. But with these 2 lines, let's see what difference it makes. And as we can see here, it makes a huge difference. Again, if we compare it to the finished product, as we can see, the text is getting very close to the way that we want it in the finished product. So the next thing we want to look at is the vertical space, and we can see that these single line links are at the bottom of the 2 line links, and that doesn't look too nice. And while we're at it, it might be nice to center the text as well with regards to each anchor link. So again, these two lines, quite straightforward. The vertical line one can be a bit confusing for people. And again, there probably will be a video coming out for that very soon. But let's see what these two lines have done. And again, you can see it is getting so much closer. It's pretty much there. You can see the links look correct. We already know that the distances are right. We've got them centered, but the logo is not looking right because this is what it should look like. And this is what it looks like at the moment. It looks the same as all the others. So that's what we are going to change next. First, let us deal with the size and the alignment. Now remember, it's got its own modifier, which is what we're going to use in order to make these changes. So again, we've only got a couple of lines that we've been using here, right aligning it and setting font size to 4. Viewing it, we get this. We can see it messes up the normal links a little bit because these are all at the top. And again, we want them in the middle. Don't worry, we'll come back to them and sort them out. However, we've got a slightly bigger problem. And that is we want this into the wild to actually be over here on the right hand side. However, the two solutions that we can use, which are floating and using absolute positioning, cause us another issue in that they take the element out of what is known as the natural or document flow of the page. What do we mean by this? Well, although it isn't 100% accurate, you can think of the document flow as how the browser arranged the HTML element as defined by their positioning rules. And remember, just because we may not have defined any, it doesn't mean they are not there by default. In other words, the browser defaults are being applied. At the moment, notice how the navigation element increased its size to accommodate the logo. We can see this by the background. In HTML, the logo element is inside the nav element, as we saw in the code. We talked about the parent and child relationship. And so the default rule of the parent is to try and adjust its size to be able to contain its children. That sounds kind of sweet, I guess. The problem we have is that when we use either the float or absolute positioning rules, we sort of remove the logo from the nav's responsibility. We will float the logo to demonstrate this, because actually this is the one that we're going to use. As you can see, now we've floated it and refreshed the page, we lose most of the logo, or half of the logo. And the reason for that is, as we said, it's been removed from the natural flow of the navigation bar. Once we used the float, the nav bar went, oh, I don't have to worry about that anymore, and shrank itself just to hold its allocated children. In fact, the only reason why we can still see even part of the logo is because the nav bar is by default a block level element, which therefore takes up its entire horizontal space if it can, and it allows us therefore to see the white text. The fix to this is a newish rule. And when I say newish, I mean it's only been working in all of the major browsers for the last few years or so, and that is the display flow route. The display flow route goes into the parent or container, which in this case is of course the nav rule. You can work out what this does. It basically tells the container to take in consideration the flow element. This fix only works for floating of the container children and not if they use absolute positioning. So let's just quickly check this, refresh. And as you can see, this has now got larger to take in consideration the logo. Now it's time to move these links down. We've already learned from the logo here that it's not a good idea to use absolute positioning. So we can use the box model for this and use the top margin, which will force it down. Since the logo is 4 rems inside, we're going to add 4.5 rems to the margin tops to try and drop them down so they're roughly in the middle of this here. Again, save and view. Maybe not what you thought was going to happen. Well, the reason for that is that we've got to remember that the logo is also part of that nav link rule, which is why we've got that modifier so that we can override some of the rules that we don't want to have applied to it. And while we're doing it, we might as well set up the margins for its top, bottom, left and right as well. If you're not accustomed to this style of rule, this is using what I call the clockwork method: top, right, bottom, and left. So again, we'll just save this and see what it looks like in the browser. And we can see that we have a very good looking navigation bar. It's getting very close to what we expect it to see in Figma. We've got these positioned nicely in the center. What we don't have is the curving. So to get the rounded corners is nice and simple. This rule will naturally go into the nav because it is the nav element that we want the rounded corners in. Again, save this rule and let's view it. And we're now getting to a point where we almost can't tell the difference between this one and this one here. The next thing we want to do is to resize the navigation bar, because at the moment it is just the full width of the page, which does actually give it some sort of level of responsive design, but we want to set a maximum width. So to add a bit of flexibility, we're also going to give it a minimum width as well. And again, these numbers have been worked out from before. Remember, the base font size is now 10 pixels. So this is 950 pixels being the minimum width and 1350 pixels being the maximum width. And where do we get these numbers from? Well, looking at Figma, we can go in, have a look at our navigation bar, top nav here, and we can see its dimension. We're not necessarily using the height because we're using some other trickery to do that, but we can use it for the width. Now the min value was basically more to do with trial and error. As we can see, as we shrink this down, it stops there, which is just about right. Okay, still makes it nice and readable. It doesn't force the into the wild or one of the links to drop down to the next line. So that is quite nice and presentable. So now we've got the main navigation. Next thing to do is to do the footer, which will be the footer navigation. And the trick here is to try and let all of the code we've already done in the CSS to do all the heavy lifting for us. So into the footer we must go. And time for your challenge. So your challenge is probably what you think it is. It is to create the HTML for the footer. Now, some things you need to know. There are 7 links that we need. You can choose to use Emmet, or you can write it out longhand if you prefer. The nav element will require 2 classes, the nav and then the modifier, which will be nav _footer. The link will require, again, the same class as before, the nav _link, and their modifier, the nav _link with a _footer. With a Brucey bonus in that the first link in the footer will also require its own class called nav _link _footer -first. Again, it is recommended that you format them nicely. So pause the video now as I'm going to do the answer in 3, 2, 1, now. So I'm going to use Emmet to do the majority of the code we need here. However, we need to add an additional class to the anch elements by giving it a footer modifier, as we spoke about before. So let's do the Emmet. nav _footer greater than a nav _link nav _link _footer times 7. Now we could add the additional class for the first link, but that would actually make the Emmet quite long. So once again, let's format it. Don't forget to add that extra link in the first one. So we're giving it footer first as its modifier. Why do we need this? Well, we'll find out why in a moment. Next thing we need to do is just to add the links as we did before. Now we've done the footer, obviously it's time to view it. We can see here that the footer navigation is actually almost already done for us. And this is because we're using the same CSS rules are being applied to it as they were to the main navigation. So all we need to do is to add the small changes that we need to make it look nice. So the first thing we want to do is to make the font just a bit smaller and shorten the distance between them a bit. And for that, we shall use the nav link footer modifier class. So just again, only a couple of lines of text, and let's see what it does. We can see this works really well. The 1 rem is absolutely fine in this case because even at 10 pixels, the Syncopate font is still relatively large and easy to read. And the shrinking of the sizes of the distances works quite nicely along with it. Now, the next thing we want to do is to sort out the big space above the link. Can you remember why this would have happened? Well, the reason for this was because we applied a 4.5 rem margin top to our links up here so that they fell in center with the into the wild. Obviously, that's not needed here. Now, we've already done a margin code here, so rather than starting to write top and bottom rules, we might as well just modify this one to margin and then use the top right, bottom left rule that we've done before. Now, some of you might note that at this point, you can't have a 0.65 rem since 0.65 of 10 will be 6.5 pixels and you can't have half a pixel. However, we'll leave it like this because number one, the browser will naturally round it up for us. And secondly, if we decide to change the size of our font, this will still ensure we get a very nice margin in there. So let's have a look at it. And as we can see, that is much better. Now we want to reset the left margin for the very first link only. And you might be asking why, but it will make sense in a moment, trust me. So this is why it had its own specialized modifier. So literally just one rule. Review this. And you might say, well, this looks really horrible. And you would be right. In a normal setup, we wouldn't want it right on the edge here. However, the difference is we actually want to have our text centered. And if this had a margin, it might make the whole of the links just slightly off center. And to center all the text within the nav bar is really easy. We're just going to use the text align center in the nav footer. We don't want to have it in the normal nav rule because it'll affect the top as well. We just want it done for the center. So we're going to put this rule in between nav and nav link because the footer one is a modifier of the nav and we should keep them all grouped. This is very important if you're thinking of using SCSS later on. And again, spelled center the proper English way, which won't be good enough here. So now let's just see how this looks. And as we can see, it is perfectly in the center. The only thing left to do now is really to shrink the actual bottom nav because it doesn't have to be as big as the top one. And again, these values I've already worked out from trial and error, but feel free to change the values yourself to one that you think is better. We're going to use the min max widths again. So min width of 75 rem and a max width of 100 rem. We'll save that and we'll view it. And as you can see, we could easily make this smaller. In fact, why don't we? Take it down to about 90 rem. And that is still absolutely fine. And now let's just shrink it down just to see what happens. And we can see it's going, it's going, it's going. And that's quite nice. We've got a nice little break. Okay, now before we go, we can also note that this is fully rounded because it is a smaller width. We don't get the same sort of corner effect as we do here because it's enough to make it fully rounded. So we're just going to correct that. We can use pixels here rather than rem because we don't necessarily want it to change based on the size of the font. Maybe we do. If we do, we can always come back and change it to 1.2 rem. So let's save it and view it. And as you can see now, it does look like it's more in line with the main navigation. Now, it does look a bit weird, this being shorter and being on the left-hand side. Like I said at the start of this video, that will be done in the next video, where we are going to center the element and actually center it on the web page itself. Because as we can see, this is actually quite short. In fact, if we view it at 100%, rather than the zoomed in that we've got it, you can see it's very far off in a 4K screen. And that's absolutely fine. Once it's centered, it will look normal. So let's put in that background color, which will be done on the body tag that we haven't actually used so far. So again, we save and review. There we have it. And our job here is done. So we've created two fairly simple navigation bars that are going to act as our header and footer for our website. And so in the next video, we're going to center this, making it ready to start actually putting content on our web page. So we'll be building a proper website. All that's left for me to say is thank you for staying with me all the way. Is there a video you want me to do? Let me know. If you want to shout out in one of my future videos, put it in the comments. If you want to ask me anything, again, comments is where it's going to go. I do read every comment. See you guys next time. This is Zen, signing off.